Okay, let's get right into it. The Taiwan Strait is always a global flashpoint, but some recent Chinese military drills there, well, they were different. Analysts are looking at the data, and they're seeing something more than just saber rattling. It looked a lot like a rehearsal for a full-scale blockade. So in this breakdown, we're going to dig into what they saw, why it's so concerning, and why it really has consequences for all of us.
To really get why this matters, you have to start with this one number: 50%. That's the share of all global container shipping. Yeah, half the world's maritime trade that sails right through the narrow Taiwan Strait. It's one of the most critical economic arteries on the entire planet.
And that, of course, brings us to the huge question that's driving all of this analysis. If that artery gets clogged, even for a little while, what happens? The ripple effects would be instant and they would be global. This is not a regional issue, it's everybody's issue.
So what exactly flipped the switch and created this new level of concern? We have to look at a specific set of military exercises from January of 2026. You can bet intelligence agencies were watching this very closely, and what they saw was a major shift from anything they'd seen before.
For a full 24 hours, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense was tracking 60 different sorties. But here's the thing, it wasn't really the number that was so alarming, it was the pattern, the movements, the coordination. It all looked less like a political message and more like a dry run. You know, a practice session for sealing the island off completely.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Let's break down the specifics. First, the eastern positioning. For the first time, naval forces weren't just hanging out in the strait. They were positioned east of Taiwan. That's right in the corridor where U.S. reinforcements would likely come from. A huge strategic shift. Second, look at the mix of aircraft. We're talking bombers, drones, early warning planes, the whole shebang. They were practicing a complex, multi-layered operation. And finally, analysts pointed out a really important shift from quantity to quality. There were fewer planes than in some past drills, but these were far more advanced, more combat ready. This wasn't for show. This is about real operational readiness.
To really grasp the gravity of this, you have to look back to the last major crisis there, back in 1996. Back then, the U.S. just sailed 2 aircraft carriers into the area to cool things down, and honestly, China couldn't do a thing about it. But today, it is a completely different world. China's advanced anti-ship missiles, the ones they call carrier killers like the DF-21D, are designed specifically to threaten those exact same ships. The whole military balance has shifted, and the cost of any potential intervention has just gone up, exponentially.
So, with all these new capabilities on full display, what's the next move? This is where the analysis has to shift from what just happened to what's most likely to happen next. It's all about trying to put a number on that risk.
And this chart right here, this is the key takeaway from the intelligence brief. Analysts think the most likely scenario, sitting at 65%, is that China just continues its campaign of intimidation. But look at that next bar. The probability of some kind of blockade action has now jumped to 30%. That is a huge increase from the previous baseline, which was around 15%. A full-on invasion, still very unlikely. But the risk of a blockade, that's now being taken very, very seriously.
That most likely scenario falls under a specific term you hear a lot these days: gray zone pressure. This is what modern conflict looks like. It's not about a big, dramatic declaration of war. No, it's a slow, grinding strategy of intimidation, military flybys, cyber attacks, economic limits, all designed to wear an opponent down without ever having to fire a single shot.
So, the most likely path forward is what you could call this slow squeeze. Just imagine almost monthly military exercises, always changing in intensity, constantly keeping Taiwan's defenses on high alert, draining their budget and their energy. You pair that with some targeted economic pressure, and the goal is to slowly erode Taiwan's will to resist, while also signaling to the rest of the world that getting involved would just be too complicated and too costly.
But then you have the most dangerous scenario. It starts with China declaring an inspection zone, which is really a blockade in all but name. Then they stop a commercial ship, demanding to inspect its cargo. Maybe Taiwan or the U.S. challenges this. Somebody makes a miscalculation, a shot is fired, and just like that, you are in an escalation spiral with the very real potential for open conflict. This is that low-probability, catastrophic impact event that keeps strategists up at night.
And if that most dangerous scenario, or even just a limited blockade, were to happen, believe me, the impact wouldn't stay in Asia. It would send a shockwave across the entire global economy, and it would affect you directly.
Let's start with this number: 90%. That is the percentage of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips. We're talking the brains inside your phone, your car, your computer, pretty much everything that are made in one place: Taiwan.
Next up, shipping.
Remember that 50% of global container traffic? If all of those ships have to go around Taiwan instead of through the strait, you're adding an extra 7 to 10 days to every single voyage between Asia and Europe. That would create an absolute logistical nightmare, on top of all the other shipping problems the world is already dealing with.
And this quote from the intelligence brief just spells it out perfectly. This isn't some slow-moving problem. The disruption would be immediate. You'd see production of cars and electronics halt within weeks. And the development of next-generation AI, which is totally dependent on those advanced chips, it would grind to a stop.
And this table here illustrates brilliantly how that real-world crisis would slam into the financial markets. Taiwanese semiconductor stocks would plummet, while their competitors, say Intel, might actually rise. Shipping company stocks, they'd soar as freight rates go through the roof. And in a big crisis, investors would flee to so-called safe haven assets like U.S. government bonds. The economic dislocation would be absolutely massive.
So given how high the stakes are, what should we be watching for now? The intelligence brief actually lays out some very specific signals, key indicators that would tell us if the situation is de-escalating, if it's actually getting better, not worse. So what would good news look like? Well, you'd want to see the frequency of those military exercises go back down to normal levels. You'd look for signs that trade and tourism are starting back up. Behind the scenes, you'd be hoping to hear that diplomatic backchannels are buzzing with activity. And out in the open, you'd watch for Chinese state media to start toning down its aggressive rhetoric. Those are the tangible signs that the pressure is actually coming off.
And all of this leaves us with the final, pretty unsettling question at the heart of this whole thing. The exercises in January proved beyond a doubt that China now has the capability to pull off a blockade. What we don't know, and what nobody knows for sure, is the intent. Is this new capability just a more powerful warning? Or is it a fully developed plan just sitting there, waiting for the right political trigger to be pulled? That is the uncertainty everyone is now trying to decode.